Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming out on this day, for arriving on time despite the change in time, and for coming out in some cold weather. We welcome you all to this special service. Let's begin with our opening song, number 149, Lift Every Voice and Sing. Have just sung, as you know, the African American national anthem. Thanks for singing it so well. We turn now to welcome and announcements from Barbara.
Good morning. Welcome to church this morning. I'm Barbara Buring, Social Justice Team Leader of the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Venice, where we strive to be a beacon of liberal religion for Florida's Suncoast and a refuge for all who seek a welcoming community, no matter your color, creed, ability, or class, no matter who you love, your gender expression, political affiliation, or religious belief. Here we celebrate our differences as we learn from one another. If you'd like to know more about this congregation and its many opportunities for learning, growth, and connection, you can peruse our calendar and announcements on Facebook or on our webpage at uucov.org. If you are visiting for the first time, we would love to meet you. Please introduce yourself with your name and where you're from. Anyone new? If you are returning from time elsewhere, please say hi. Okay, welcome back. If you're joining us online, please consider navigating over to our website, clicking the donate button there, and giving as generously as you can. On the second Sunday of each month, we pass the basket on behalf of a charitable organization. Today, Mercy Check, President of the Board of Directors of CHAP's Food and Hygiene Pantry, the recipient of today's special offering, will tell us about her organization. Please welcome Mercy.
Good morning, everyone. CHAPS is almost 30 years old. We were started back in 1992 by two women that had some friends that had AIDS and they were not allowed to go to food pantries. So the friends started collecting coupons and money and went shopping, and that was the beginning of CHAPS. We now have almost 400 clients, and CHAPS is food and hygiene. None of the original people are with us today, but some of the people that we have been servicing have been with us for 25 years. Part of the reason that they're still with us is that we were able to provide food and also hygiene items, especially cleaning products, that has been able to keep them strong to fight off infections and also to keep their environment clean. We are like a little grocery store. So we have a certain amount of things that a regular grocery store would have, and the clients fill out an order every month for what they would like. And that changes. Some of the medications do a number on their digestive systems. So one month they may be ordering soup and saltines and things like that, and then next month something more robust like beef stew. So we're there to provide what they need. We also have almost any kind of bean you can think of because of different ethnic backgrounds. We also have beets, which is a very northern thing. And of course, grits was a southern thing. So we're there for all the different kinds of things that people request. And the hygiene items, they're cleaning things. Those are things you can't buy with food stamps. You can feed yourself, but you can't wipe yourself. So toilet paper, et cetera, is very, very important. And we provide that even during the beginning of COVID when the shelves were bare. Unfortunately, we only give each family 2 rolls of toilet paper, but it was something. And we have stocked up since then, so that shouldn't happen again. But if you've been shopping, you've seen the shelves. And the shelves are bare in some areas, which makes it hard for us to provide for all these people. I was just in a store where you could only buy 2 vegetable oils. Well, vegetable oil is something that's needed for a lot of different cooking things, and that's something we provide. It is essential that we provide things for them to be able to feed themselves and their families. You folks, with your contributions, help us do that. During COVID, we ended up delivering a lot of orders, but our drop-off spot where we bring the orders that are for people up in Osprey, Nokomis that don't want to drive down to Port Charlotte where we are, is dropped off at Church in Venice, Suncoast MCC over on Jackson Road. And the nice thing about COVID was that when the church closed, we still delivered food. So we delivered to that church, and people sat in the van waiting for the clients to come and pick up their things. So we didn't miss a step as far as feeding people. But it was also a blessing because we were able to add fresh produce, eggs, butter, meat, frozen meat, things that they never were able to get before because it was just dropped off inside the church and the clients came in and picked it up whenever they were in the area. So now they're forced to be there, but they get the benefit of having fresh produce and other things that we weren't able to provide before. So I appreciate your support. We have a lot of clients up in this area. Some of them like to drive down to our area, to Port Charlotte where we are, just for all the different things that they can get down there. The list of things that we have is just so long, and we have clothes, and we have a lot of little lending library. So the clients get a benefit of searching through those things. So thank you very much. We are going to be part of the Giving Challenge that's coming up in April. And there's some information out on the, something out there. Now Barbara will come back and finish her announcements.
Thank you, Mercy. Okay, some events coming up soon. Today and March 20th, the social justice team is collecting money for Ukrainian relief on the Sanctuary Lanai before and after service. Last week, we collected $3,805. Thank you for your generosity. I am very proud to be among you. After service today, 11:15, there will be a meeting here in the sanctuary to discuss whether we want to have Blue Lotus on our campus, to build their new temple here. It's open to everyone. Thursday, March 17th at 10:30 a.m., the Bereavement Support Group will meet in Waters Hall A. Also on Thursday, March 17th, from 4:30 to 6:30 p.m., there'll be a peace vigil outside conducted by the monks of the Blue Lotus Temple. Bring a chair. It's going to be outdoors on the lawn. Friday, March 18th, Jazz with Maury at 2 p.m. in the sanctuary, featuring the James Suggs Trio. Tickets are $15 at the door. Saturday, March 19th at 10 a.m., the UCOV annual meeting in the sanctuary. If you need an absentee ballot, because you absolutely cannot be here, see Pam Palmer. But we need people to come here if it's all possible, because we need to make quorum. And next Sunday, following the service, an adult forum on embracing diversity, discussion with Pastor Dr. Bill Nelsen and Dr. Daryl Jodock.
Eileen Leakley. Our call to worship is a reading from Portraits of Peace by John Knowltner, recognizing biases and blind spots. There's the funny thing about blind spots. You don't always know that you have them. We attach shame and guilt to the stigma of being biased, and because of that, we work hard to believe that we don't have any biases. We reserve them for the bad people, and in that way, we avoid having to face our own. We all have biases. They are relatively easy to spot in other people, and a little harder to recognize in ourselves. But they are there, and they get in the way of our clear understanding of the world.
Having read the history of the beginning and the reason for this chalice, it's my indeed great pleasure to light the chalice. Followed by these important words from the Hebrew Scriptures, from Leviticus 19:18. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against any of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Our opening hymn is number 348, Guide My Feet. Just sung another important song that was prominent during the Civil Rights Movement. We turn now to Bill for another reading.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Fortunately, I don't have to move the box over. A reading today from Portraits of Peace by John Knowltner. When will that one day come? This is from an interview that he did with Joanne Bland, who at 11 years old marched with Dr. Martin Luther King in one of the defining moments of the Civil Rights Movement, the Selma to Montgomery March for voting rights. She still lives in Selma today. She says, when you continually get hurt by people who don't look like you, you are suspicious of them. Here you come, smiling, but you are a wolf in sheep's clothing. You're white, and eventually you're going to show your true colors, that you don't like me, period. I tried to teach my child and my granddaughter that it's not like that. We try to take people at face value, but it's hard for me to explain how you expect racism when you're black. You expect discrimination when you're black, and we don't question it as often as we should. One day will be all right. I'm just tired of waiting for one day. I want it to be now. I want it to be in my lifetime. When we're growing up in the 1960s, I thought by now we'd have that blessed community, and everything would be peaceful. It has not happened.
Thank you, Bill, very much for that reading. I'm looking around and I don't see Margie out here, the children. Wait a minute, there's at least one in the back, right? And are there others? Yes, we got a couple who are going to come forward. That's great. I'm glad to hear it. So, we ask you to come forward because we do have, again, something special for you. The first thing I'm going to do is provide a little reading that comes from this book called Maniac McGee. Some of you might have heard about this. It's a wonderful story about a kid who basically became an orphan when his parents died. And he was sent off to live with an aunt and an uncle who didn't treat him very well. So he escaped from them. And he went back to the community that was right in the Philadelphia area where he had been living. Only he went to another part of that community instead of to the West End where he was. He went to the East End, which was the community of African Americans. And he was taken in by a family there. And this is what he said in part about enjoying that particular community. He said he loved the 4th of July block party, when the whole East End converged for a day and night of games and music and grilled chicken and ribs and sweet potato pie and dancing until the last firecracker and then some. Maniac, he loved the colors of the East End. The people, colors. For the life of him, he couldn't figure why these East Enders, though, called themselves black. He kept looking, and the colors he found were ginger snap and light fudge and dark fudge and acorn and butter rum and cinnamon and burnt orange, but never licorice, which to him was real black. And then later on, he comments about his own color when he says, Maniac kept trying, but he still couldn't see it, this color business. He didn't figure he was white any more than the East Enders were black. He looked at himself over pretty hard and came up with at least 7 different shades and colors right on his own skin. Not one of them being what he would call white, except for his eyeballs, which weren't any whiter than the eyeballs of the kids in the East End. So I ask you, wonderful, beautiful looking children, what color are you? It's hard, isn't it? I don't think of myself as white. I doubt anybody else of you, except we get categorized, don't we? We get put in a category, and those people that were described here in the East End, they get put into a category. We got all kinds of other people who get pushed into categories. And we have to live with that right now, don't we? All these categories. Do you have some good friends who are of other colors? In school? Not in school, but other places? Do you? You do? That's great. Good for you. You see, sometimes the children are the ones who are going to lead us, aren't they? As to looking out and reaching and becoming grateful for the diversity, the wonderful diversity that we have in this country. And there's again a set of guides that we can all have. Just like last week when we talked about religious diversity, we gave each of you, of course, a sign, right, that said humankind, do both. Margie, what are we giving them today?
Today you're going to get some pins that say choose kind. And it's a good reminder for you. You can put a pin on. And do you have anyone else you'd like to give one to?
Don't forget your parents. Sometimes it's nice to get them to choose kind, too. All right. She's going to give it to her mom. That's good. Choose kind. Thank you very much for coming up again. And remember, next week we'll have another special present for you, and it gets better every week. Remember that. Okay, we'll see you next week. Thanks for coming up here. We appreciate it. Goodbye, blessings to you, thanks. And so now it's time for our celebrations and sorrows. And so we invite anyone to give any brief comments you would like about something you want to celebrate or something you want to share with us that you want us to know about so we can be with you, think of you, pray with you in that regard as well. I see one over here. Now wait a minute, I'm going to grab my mask because I want to be respectful, even though, isn't it great, folks, that we've gone back to the idea that we can have masks as optional, but out of respect for those of you who might still want masks. I'll put mine on. For this particular time. I'm coming. Okay. Let me go around. Around this way. Okay, Val.
Thank you. I'm warning you, it's spring break. And when spring break happens, that means you get families from Denver who come. So our Ridley family, Kevin, Hudson, Ainsley, and Jane are here, and we are very happy to have them.
We welcome you. Welcome. Nice to have you. Welcome to here. All right, who else would like to share? Yes, I know we've got a couple of important ones over here, both of you together, right? Okay. I was warned about this. I'm warned about this special performance here. Okay.
Thank you. So I'm Mo Morrison, and Jean, we, before the week passes, we would like to acknowledge the efforts of Kinder Munz. I should say the successful efforts. Kinder was instrumental in assuring all of us that the bipartisan single-member district voting has prevailed as of Tuesday, and we really just want to say thank you. Thank you for your...
Kendra is an Energizer bunny. She even came to choir, and she had to lean against the wall because she was so tired.
Thank you for those wonderful efforts, and you're going to hear more about voting rights later on, and that's a wonderful example. Way to go. That is fantastic. I see. Yes. I'm coming, Eileen. Here we go.
Oh, you let us hold our own mic. I want everybody, if you haven't noticed already, the fresh coat of paint on the sanctuary and the beautiful new blinds. Those nasty old ones that kept falling apart are gone, and we just appreciate the people who supported that. Thank you.
Yes, it's great. Beautiful colors. Wonderful. Anyone else? Anyone else have something to share? Yes, please. And go, Danny.
Hi, I'm Denny Fuller, and I'd like to celebrate the opening hymn, which is known as the Negro National Anthem, written by two black brothers in St. Augustine in celebration of the 100th anniversary of the birth of Abraham Lincoln. And the lyricist sat on the porch, wrote the lyrics, passed them through to his brother at the piano, who created the tune. And the gay community picked up this song of joy and oppression 40 or 50 years later and adopted it.
Thank you for sharing that and that important connection, Denny. Anybody else? Oh, yes. Go back to Tom.
I'm happy to say that my wife, Pat, will be back next Monday, tomorrow, at the art meeting. She's just finishing taking care of a slight case of COVID. She was tested positive. Luckily, I was not. But she's been doing better all the time, and she's doing very well now. And she hopes to be back in full action tomorrow.
Here, here, that's great. That's wonderful. Before I drop this mic, I want to say one more thing about something that happened in our hometown of St. Peter, Minnesota this week. And it has to do with the gay community. One of our star basketball players on our team in St. Peter, Minnesota, earlier this year in the season had come out. And his teammates backed him, and the students in St. Peter High School backed him. But they've gone to play against one of our rival teams in a town about 20 miles away. And he got catcalls and he got jeers because of that. And the last game that they faced against this team was last week, and the same thing happened. And so what happened? Our players showed up in their warm-up jackets in rainbow. And we were so proud of them. We heard all about it because our grandson is the manager of the team as well. And the whole town has come out and given support to that. And so it's wonderful to see these kinds of reactions, especially among our teachers and our young people who back the kind of kids that deserve to be backed at this time. So I wanted to share that as well with you. And so please, at this moment, remember what you've heard in celebration, mostly celebration we heard, which was great. And remember that, if you would, and let's again include in our thoughts, in our prayers, however you would like to pray, however you want to think of the people in Ukraine at this time as well. Let's take a moment of silence again. Thank you all. We continue now with a reading as we prepare for the interlude and then the sermon. And I have another reading from this book that's actually was the cause of our being here, Margie and I being here, Embracing Diversity. Last week we read a passage that had to do with religious diversity. This one has to do, of course, with racial diversity, our theme for today. We earlier noted that personal faith is not diminished by active interchange and dialogue with people of other faiths. In the same way, an appreciation for one's own ethnic background is not lost by actively befriending and engaging with people of other races, learning about their backgrounds, and participating willingly and enthusiastically in a variety of their special customs. Humans are not called to be colorblind, but to understand and appreciate their differences as well as their commonalities. We turn now again to our wonderful choir for the interlude. Turn, turn, turn. Thank you so much. Margie and I are just delighted to have been here when the choir was still singing. That is wonderful. We begin today with a flashback, a scene that took place in about this time of the year in March of 1965. The scene was Montgomery, Alabama. There were 6 of us in the car, 3 blacks and 3 whites. And we were on our way from Montgomery to a civil rights rally that was to be held at Tuskegee Institute, which is not far away from Montgomery. And so we got in the car and we headed out. We needed some gas. Our driver, who was African American, he stopped at a gas station, and the attendant there came out and he looked into the car, saw who was in the car, signaled to the attendant back inside the gas station office, and all of a sudden the lights went out. It was about 7 o'clock at night. And he said, "I'm sorry, we're closed." We know that he reopened as soon as we left, and for everybody else who wanted to come. And we headed down the road, and all of a sudden we saw the flashing lights of a police car behind. And the police car stopped us. The officer came out and gave a ticket to our driver for having gone through a red light and having failed to turn, give a signal when turning. Now, of course, the problem was we didn't go through any red light, and there was no turn that we made. It was all trumped up, of course. But we were sent then down to the police station of the county jail in Montgomery. And our driver had to stay in the jail itself. The rest of us stayed in the jailhouse so we could give support to our driver, along with all the other civil rights lawyers who were there trying to get people out of the jail continually there in Montgomery at the time. Why were we there? We were there because it was the time of the Voting Rights Act. We were trying to get it passed. And we were called by Martin Luther King and others to come from wherever we were. I came from New York City, where I was at that time studying at Union Theological Seminary and Columbia University. And right now I want to give special acknowledgement to this guy over here, to Richard, who was at that time in Selma, because he had gone from Illinois, where he was studying, down to Selma so he could join the Selma to Montgomery march at that end. My job was to be in Montgomery to help set up all the logistics. I was not on the march, but set up the logistics for the 25,000 people who were coming in at the end of that march to head up to the Capitol there in Montgomery. It was all about the civil rights movement. It was all about the Voting Rights Act specifically. And it was a time of challenge, it was a time of danger, but it was a time of great joy as well, because there were victories along the way. As you know, the Voting Rights Act was passed later on that summer. And during that time, we looked at all the other legislation that was passed, and many of us who participated in that movement, we rejoiced and said, this is it. We're finally, in this country, beginning to realize what we're all about to be this country, to guarantee equality for all people, and to give support to each other, and to embrace the diversity of the country. But we know that that didn't happen. We look at what's just happened, especially in recent years in this country. The Voting Rights Act, for one thing, as a decision was made in 2013 by the Supreme Court, they gutted a key part of the Voting Rights Act, and we're trying to recover from that now, including what was done here just recently. And lots of other things have happened that says to us all, we still have a long ways to go, where there's still lots of discrimination against people of all different kinds of colors along the way. And I think that as we look at recent years, especially the last 2 years, we began to understand how far we do have to go because of what happened as a result of COVID. Who got hurt most because of COVID? To be sure, many of our older folks did, and those who had illnesses of one kind or another. But beyond that, the people of color suffered much more than anybody else. It's estimated that in certain communities, in certain states, that blacks were twice as likely to die as a result of COVID than the regular population. And among Hispanics in certain parts of the country, it was 4 times what happened to everybody else in this country. And so we know that we still have a long ways to go. And so today I'd like to just share with you just 2 questions that we'll seek to answer. The first is this: what happened? What happened to all those dreams and ideals that we had coming out of the civil rights movement? And all those songs that we have sung, and we'll sing one more today. What happened? And secondly, the question, the most important one, what can we do now to still make a difference, including in congregations exactly like this one? Well, what did happen? Well, first of all, we should have realized that changing people by legislation is not all that it's going to take, because legislation doesn't always change the minds and the hearts of people as well. So what happened is that we still end up with all kinds of segregation, too much segregation in this country. If you read our book, you'll see that there's a report that we gave there about a particular survey that was done not too long ago that said 75% of the whites in this country, in their social circles, have nobody else except white people. Nobody else. 75% of us are that way. And among the rest of us who have reached out in one way or another, the numbers are not real high. It averages about 1%. That is, 1 out of 100 of the friends and acquaintances that we have might be a person of another color. So we have a long way to go just to overcome that separateness yet. What else happened? Well, we didn't pay enough attention to the idea of bringing about the changes in structure and policies that have been around too long, and many of which are still there, and we feel the impact of it. The income gap has actually increased in this country, especially not just with people of color and those who are much more wealthy, but certainly impacts the people of color more than most other people. And the education gap is still there, and the housing gap is still there. Many of us don't realize that we still have these major segregated communities in this country as a result of federal policies after the Second World War, including how we treated our GIs after they came home, and the white ones got all kinds of advantages to go out and get good houses, but the blacks didn't. And we look at, still there are places around where you find it very difficult for people of color to get into the housing sections they would like to now because of all the other things that have happened, including the redlining over years. There's a reason that we have these kind of still ghettos that exist around this country. What else has happened? Well, we know that over the recent years, more and more people became scared. They became fearful of our increasing diversity. Yes, if you look at the 2020 census, you notice that now we're more than 40% people of color in this country. And within another 20 years, it'll be over 50%. Now, most of us are okay with that. We're pretty comfortable. Some of us even excited about it. That's what America was really all about in many ways. But that's not true of everybody. If you look at the surveys that continue to be done, the research done by the Southern Poverty Law Center out of Montgomery, they've documented that over time, we've now risen to more than 1,000 different nationalists, white nationalist groups, and hate groups of one kind and another. But here's the interesting thing. In the last couple of years, that number has actually gone down. 2 years ago, it was about 850. This last year, the report just came out from them that it was 733. But the scary thing is that they said one of the reasons that's declined is because many of their ideas have found their way into the general population, at least some of our population. And that's very scary, so they don't need those separate groups if it's out there in the general population that we have to battle with. What else has happened? Well, unfortunately, we've become more and more divided. Some would say we are now in tribal groups. And what they mean by that, sociologists have looked at it and said, when people begin to feel lonely and ostracized in one way or another, they try to overcome that loneliness by joining groups, by joining tribes, if you will, to finding people who think like they do, and to finding people who will support basically their same ideas. And so what do? Well, we go to the same on-site things online. We go to the same TV shows, right? Especially the news ones. And we find people who are like ourselves. It's what's called confirmation bias. We confirm where we want to go and where we want to have our beliefs upheld. The upshot of that is that we've become more divided, and we have to find ways to overcome that. Let me just share with you two very frightening statistics that occurred. Right after George Floyd was killed in our home state of Minnesota. That next month, and you remember that he died around Memorial Day of that year. Well, there was a couple of measurements that occurred in the month after that, the month of June, that are amazing. First of all, Google reports in its search engine that during that month, there were all kinds of people who did research on finding out about the word empathy. People wanted to know, what does it mean to really have empathy for what was happening to him and so many other people? And words like that, more than they'd ever seen on Google. At the same time, during that same month, there were more than 3.9 million guns sold in this country. More than had ever been sold in 1 month of counting until that time. Does that say something about our divisions in this country? Unfortunately, it does. But let's turn to that second and much more hopeful question. What can we do? What can congregations like this do? The book that Daryl Jodek and I wrote was aimed at congregations just like this, and my home congregation and others and local communities, because where changes are going to take place is at the local level. Changes will take place in our households and with people like yourself. And I'd like to begin with showing you a couple of photographs. You'll see that coming up on the screen. Back in 2017, in the month of August, I was living in Boston area at that time, serving as the interim president of an Episcopal divinity school. And we all had read in the papers there in Boston that there was going to be a rally of a group of white nationalists. And they were going to come to their rally on the Boston Commons. If you've been to Boston, you know it's a beautiful place, a great place for holding demonstrations. Well, there were lots of us who heard about this. Communities did, congregations did, and said, wait a minute. We don't want that to be the message that should be heard. The message should be that America is not composed of white nationalists who want to oppose immigration and anything else that's happening in this country. And so the word went out that we ought to have a counter demonstration. And lo and behold, on that day, more than 20,000 people showed up from various congregations. And I'm sure that there were a number of Unitarian Universalist congregations who were there on that day as well. And there were all kinds of signs that people brought. This is just one that you see. Justice will not be served until those who are unaffected are just as outraged as those who are. A quote from Benjamin Franklin. But the sign that caught more attention, and certainly by me, but many others, was this particular one. Love thy neighbor. They used the King James Version, right, from the Bible. And then they added these words, no exceptions. Love your neighbor, no exceptions. This came from a Methodist church that put this big banner together. And that is where we must start. We start with that which has guided our faith, that which has guided us in our ethical behavior. And I would say, when I look at the 7 principles of Unitarian Universalism, that those words up there, love your neighbor without exception, are embedded deeply in your own statements, especially in these first 3. The inherent worth and dignity of every person, not just some people, but every person. Justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. Acceptance of one another and encouragement of one another, not just in your congregation, but beyond. And so if you take those messages, then we can explain what does it mean to love one another without exception. It means, first of all, that we take individual actions to love one another. And you can start close to home. And you can start here in your own congregation. And it's okay for white folks, we're told, to talk to other white folks. In fact, when Daryl Jodek and I began writing our book, we're 2 white, older folks, right? And so we went to some of our black friends who were also writing books of similar kinds and said, is there a place for us to address these same issues and talk to other white folks? And they said, absolutely. In fact, it should start there. Because you have so much to say to each other. And then we can join together in the actions that need to take place to make change in this country. So talk to each other, talk to your families, share with each other when you have had your first experiences by reaching out to people of other colors, or when you didn't have them, and what your thinking process has been and how it's begun to change. Share that with each other. And then go beyond and begin to see where you can develop relationships. I know many of you are saying, oh, it's so hard when we live in a place like this. There aren't a whole lot of opportunities, but you can open up those opportunities. You can use technology. You can reach out to other congregations. Establish a relationship with a congregation of another color. Or go take time once in a while when you can to visit a Black Baptist congregation. Celebrate with them. It'll be a little different than here in some ways. Or an AME church. Margie and I have been there, and I have actually had the occasion to preach in a Black Baptist or an AME church. And it's actually kind of exciting to preach there. Why? Because when you're a preacher, you get all kinds of feedback during the sermon. Right on, brother. Right on, sister. I haven't heard that here too much, but that's okay. Right, okay. Or in my home congregation the same way. So those are the experiences we need to keep having in life. And then don't forget also, if you're going to love your neighbor without exception, to look at those structural changes, the policy changes that need to be made, so we can make sure that we open up opportunities to everybody in this country. And don't forget that it doesn't have to be political all the time, because there's lots of room in the private sector for those who don't want to see government do quite so much, for the private sector to add and reach out and make changes in this country, and offer scholarships and offer new opportunities to people of all different kinds. And of course, there's lots of room for government to do more to overcome those structural and policy differences as well. That's what it means to love your neighbor without exception. And so finally, I would say, love your neighbor without exception means then you can join with people, join with our friends of other colors, and reach out to begin to realize those visions we have for this country, to be a country where we can embrace diversity and find joy with each other in that diversity as well. And you'll hear more about that when we get the final week of this month, about how we can experience joy in So that is how we can love each other, our neighbors, without exception. And you folks in this church, yes, can use the words I know you love to use all the time, which is to embrace the spirit of life. And that's what you're doing when you're loving your neighbor without exception. And to that we can all say, yes, embrace the spirit of life. Amen? Amen. Amen. Now we turn to our closing hymn, and yes, you'll recognize this from the Civil Rights Movement. Let's sing it out loud. We shall overcome. The chalice is extinguished. And now receive this benediction. Go in peace. Live simply, gently, at home in yourselves. Act justly. Speak justly. Remember the depth of our own compassion. Forget not your power in the days of your powerlessness. And yes, seek to embrace diversity. As together we say, Amen.